This is the first industrial revolution. When you get a little bit older, we'll talk about the industrial revolution in a different light when we talk about the second wave of the whole thing. But we're going to start at the beginning, going back to England and all that good stuff, where we start to see a change in how our economy works and how eventually the North and the South will differ, leading to the Civil War and other really important issues. So let's dive in. If you have the questions in front of you right now, feel free to answer as you go, or you can do it afterwards. So, why does this matter? Like I had said before, prior to this time period, the vast majority of people in the United States were farmers, subsistence farmers, farmers that are, growing just enough food so their families can survive. Was there bigger farmers? Sure, but the vast majority of people didn't have an option. They were just farmers. Their wives and daughters helped in the field. They managed the home, took care of kids, cooked, cleaned, all of that good stuff, and made things like soap and other simple goods. But this is all about the change. The way that the United States works forevermore is going to change very soon in the late 1700s. So I need you to write this down, what the Industrial Revolution is. The Industrial Revolution refers to a time period of the 1700s where machines started taking the jobs of hand tools and other human tasks. Okay, machines will be built that are powered by flowing water or steam engines, and eventually we'll move on to different types, but that's what we're going to focus on right now. That take the jobs that usually are performed by humans, horses, livestock, energy that we would have to put out. It's going to save us time, it's going to save us energy, and it's going to really pave the way for what we're going to do in the future. So, as early as the 1760s, probably one of the most important inventions that's created something called the spinning jenny. And what this is was it sped up the process for spinning thread, for making clothes and material like that. Eventually, after that happens, we're going to look at something called the water frame, which is a pretty simple machine that just uses the flowing water of a river to power a machine that spins thread. Okay, that means that someone's not going to sit there and have to crank it or power it themselves, which is great. Eventually, other machines are going to be created that are going to speed up the weaving process and actually creating the clothes. It's going to cut down time immensely, and then eventually we're going to start to see factories pop up. And really, what a factory is a place for these huge machines and the workers to subside, to live. Prior to this, people were making their own clothes in their houses, or they were making all of their own products really at home. And what a factory is a factory takes these machines, it takes these people that work with these machines, and it puts them in one room, one big room usually, to create these products for people. So I want you to write this down as well as a vocab word, factory system. Okay, and that's what I had mentioned earlier. That's bringing people and the machines to the same place, and that same place is designed to make products. As I said before, people in the past would make their own clothes and products at their house using the skills that they have learned over the process of generations. Now we are going to go somewhere to this factory, to this building, to make these products, not just for ourselves, but for other people as well. Okay, most of these factories originally were built on riverbanks, and if you know anything about, hydropower, it's because moving water can power, water wheels and things like that emit energy. You don't have to have someone there, like I said before, standing there with a crank if the water is just going to do it for you. It's a lot easier. It's more efficient. People don't get tired or injured. Okay, these factories, though, these are big buildings. These are expensive. And they still are today. These machines, they're expensive as well. So not everyone could afford one of these. In fact, very few people on their own could afford them. So they look for capitalists, who are people who invest their money into businesses, hoping to make a profit. Okay, and that's still the way that companies work today. They look for investors, because they don't have enough money to do all the research or to build the machines or to distribute products or buy trucks or anything like that. Okay, so I need you to know that word as well. So By 1784, people in Great Britain are able to produce 25 times the amount of thread, which leads to clothes and other products like that, than they were just 20 years before that. So this is, an amazing invention, or several inventions, and it's only going to continue to get better. So how about steam power? Steam power is kind of the next step, okay? Because using water did have disadvantages. During the dry seasons in some riverbeds, you wouldn't see any flowing water, meaning that you wouldn't have any power, meaning that you can't make anything. Um, Many factories are built on the banks of rivers that are in rural areas, which means that not a lot of people live there, which means it's going to be hard to find people to work in these factories. Yeah, the machines can do a lot, but the machines still need people to operate these machines. Okay, in the 1790s, this guy named Richard Arkwright, which I kind of failed to mention earlier, he is the guy who created the water frame. He's also the first guy to build the steam powered textile factory. Textile just refers to clothes and cloth like that. Okay, with this steam powered factory, you no longer have to build factories on the banks of river. You can build them wherever you want, which later on we'll talk about. It's going to lead to the creation of modern cities and things along those lines. Okay, so all of the things I was just talking about pretty much are all happening in Great Britain. And there are going to take place here in the United States as well. In 1789, one of Arkwright's workers, a guy by the name of Samuel Slater, he left Great Britain and he moved to the United States. And the reason why he had moved to the United States is that he'd been working under Arkwright, for a long time, and he'd seen his inventions and he had studied those inventions. And he thought that if he were to move to the United States and to bring his knowledge of these machines with him, he could make an incredible amount of money. Okay, so when he gets to the United States, Slater is going to team up with a wealthy merchant, a wealthy guy named Moses Brown, and he lives in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And what they're going to do is they're going to create really this first industrial factory setting in the United States, with Slater building, his version of a spinning machine from memory. Obviously, had to study that for a really long time. That's not an easy thing to do. But this is really kind of the beginning of the American Industrial Revolution, which is going to continue to get so much bigger throughout our history. So eventually, you're going to see more and more factories start popping up in the Northeast. The Northeast is the area that we had talked about, like New England, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, places like that. And as you probably remember from earlier, there's some wealthy people there for sure. Some of the earliest inhabitants of the United States, including the founding fathers, are wealthy New Englanders. So most of these people that own factories are going to live in this region. But factories, yeah, sure, they existed, but they didn't really take off until the War of 1812. And if you remember, the War of 1812, the British had blockaded all of our ports. We weren't able to export or import anything. So we have to start relying on creating our own goods. And it takes the War of 1812 for us to realize that we can do it and we're more than capable of creating our own things and becoming pretty self-sufficient. So after the War of 1812, you're going to see a lot more things being created in the United States. Really, like you see in that last box there, the USA never really looks back. You're going to see the United States continue to grow to be, the most industrialized country in the world, and create the most diverse and monstrous economy that the world had ever seen. And it all kind of starts right here with building these early factories in New England. Some of the most famous factories in the New England area during this time were at a place called Lowell, which we'll get to in a second. But this whole area originally was developed by a guy named Francis Cabot Lowell. And Lowell had visited Great Britain in the 1790s and had taken, a look at all of these machines that Arkwright created and other people had created. And he brought those ideas back to the United States. He thought that he could improve upon them, which he does. He starts several factories in the area of Waltham, Massachusetts, and what he does is that he noticed that in Great Britain anyway, the areas where they were to create the thread or spin the thread itself, and where they would weave the textiles or the clothes, were in separate buildings. And what he's going to do is he's going to combine these two processes under the same roof, making it more productive, more efficient. It's really going to change the way that textiles work. Now, after Lowell dies, his business partners, investors, people involved at the top are going to create a new town with benefits for their workers, places that they can shop, places that they can live, places they can go to get medical treatment. Some very early examples of benefits for workers. Um, and they're going to create this town and they're going to rename it after their good friend Francis Lowell. They're going to name it Lowell, Massachusetts. And Lowell, Massachusetts is going to go on to be one of the most famous factory towns in the United States. So, pretty cool story there. Okay, just real quickly about the people that worked in most of these Lowell factories. Most of these were young girls working with the spinning machines, and most of these girls lived in dorms or like little apartments on site, meaning they lived right there next to the factories. And what was pretty neat about these Lowell factories is they provided education for these girls after their shifts, really introducing them to education that they probably never would have had before. Most girls didn't get the opportunity to go to school, and in fact, many people in general didn't get that opportunity. So um, that's really pretty state of the art, especially for the time, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Um, so in the United States, eventually we start to see these factories flourish. We start to see them working really well. Um, we start something called mass production, which we still do to this day. And what it is we use these machines and we use these factories to create the same exact product over and over again in massive quantities. We do that really efficiently. Okay, really popular items. And a lot of this is due to a guy named Eli Whitney, who we'll talk about in a little bit as well, about one of his inventions. But he created something called interchangeable parts, meaning that all of these products are these important things that were going out were going to be built out of very simple parts to put together. Anybody could do it. Okay, you have one task, putting together this simple machine or whatever it is, and it changes the workforce, because before you had to have somebody with a lot of knowledge of how to build something. Now that's not the case. You just have to be able to put these simple parts together, which means you don't have to be skilled, which means you don't have to pay anybody that much either. It's really going to change the way that American business, and really business across the planet, works forever. Okay, this all sounds really good, I know, but the Industrial Revolution has a lot of negatives. Okay, these Lowell mills, yeah, did they provide benefits for some of their workers? Sure, but virtually no one else did. People that worked in these factories worked really long hours, up to 14 hours a day. They worked with machines that weren't necessarily always safe, not the safety features that you see today. And if you got hurt, you just got fired. There was no laws protecting workers' rights. Children as young as 7 years old were working in these factories. Now, if you know a 7-year-old right now, and you can imagine them working in a dangerous factory, it's almost comical to think that that was something that they did, but they absolutely did. Okay, it is going to take a long time in the United States before we start to see any sort of protection for workers. And really, in this class, you're not going to see that. You're going to see that next year in your second half of U.S. history. But I thought it was really important that we talked about this stuff just briefly before we move in to the next thing. And the next thing, we're going to start to look how the North and the South go different directions. North really takes this industrial mentality, while the South remains agricultural. And I guess that you can probably understand where this idea of slavery is going to fit in. Okay, where this idea of a eventual civil war will take place. But I thought it was